How are you doing today?
I'm well, really excited for this conversation. Looks like we have folks dialing in from all over or tuning in from all over. Columbia, South Carolina is in the house. Um, and I'm excited because, look, our guests on this evening come from all over the country. And really, this is a national conversation that we need to have. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to give a few more minutes for um, Justin and Sophie to join us. But for those of you who have tuned in thus far, okay, Atlanta's in the house. Please let us know where you are. I want this to be a very interactive conversation, so feel free to drop questions or comments for Sutton and our other guests in the comment box. But really looking forward to this conversation. So Sutton, where are you in the world right now?
Right now, I am in Lenapehoking, so-called Manhattan. I'm at the community center of the Urban Indigenous Collective. We're actually getting ready to open our doors in the next week. We have an opening that we'll be hosting next Friday, and we are really excited to be able to welcome community into a safe space for all urban natives.
I love that. And I think I saw, and congrats, so you definitely have to let us know when everything is all up and running, but that's exciting news. Oh, let's see who we have here. Oh, tuning in from South Africa. Oh, I love that. We're international, son.
That's right. I was just in South Africa for my 30th birthday in February. So I was in Johannesburg, and Cape Town. And oh, Table Mountain is such a beautiful, beautiful part of nature.
Oh, I love that. I love my visit to the continent. Amazing. Hey, Justin, how are you?
Greetings. Can y'all hear me good?
Yes.
We can. Hello.
Hello.
All right. It looks like Sophie's coming in and we can get started. Again, welcome and thank you to everyone that has joined us. Hi, Sophie. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much.
Well, since this, I feel like, is a national conversation today, Sophie, where are you dialing in from? Justin, where are you tuning in from?
I'm dialing in from Washington, D.C., but I'm originally from L.A. and go to school in the Bay Area, so bi-coastal girl over here.
I am from Virginia Beach, Virginia, so shout out to the Hampton Roads area.
Love it. Well, thank you all for joining us. And for those who may be new to Justice Now, I'm Jerica Richardson. I'm the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. And I'm really excited for today's conversation. It's one that's really important to me and a lot of those in my family and my community, because I think we all go through a lot, just as human beings. And there's often a lot of attention paid to our physical wellness, but it's critically important that we also focus on our mental wellness. And July is National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I wanted to have a conversation about what's happening in our communities, how we can increase access, and really just dive in deep on an issue that sometimes doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So I would like to introduce my brilliant guests who are doing amazing things. I'm just going to give a couple top lines on you all and kind of what you do, but I hope throughout the conversation you feel free to share more or dive a little deeper. And I want this to, be free flowing. So I'll ask you all a couple of questions, but if there's something like awesome that one of the other guests say or something that really strikes you as interesting and you want to add to it, please jump on in. So our first guest is Sutton King, and Sutton serves as an advisor, and she is also co-founder and president of the Urban Indigenous Collective. Welcome, Sutton.
Thank you. Poso Shakoli. It's so great to be here. And that's me saying hello in the Menominee and Oneida languages.
Beautiful. And then we are also joined by Sophie Chev, who is an advisor to the National Alliance on Mental Illness and a poet, among other things. And I know, Sophie, you have a really deep bio, so I hope you share some of those things with us during the conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to share space with you guys.
And finally, last but not least, we are joined by Justin Little. So Justin is a mental health advocate, but is also a host of the Mental Wealth podcast. So Justin, I'm super excited to have you on. I know you have conversations like these all the time, and I'm really happy to have you here and hear what you have to share. I think I'm going to just throw a question out to the panel, and you all can jump in and take it in any order. How have your ethnic backgrounds and your cultural experiences shaped your respective approaches to mental health advocacy?
I'm happy to jump in here. I'm Afro-Indigenous, so I come from both the Menominee and Oneida Nations of Wisconsin. I grew up really in an urban area accessing something called Indian Health Service. Indian Health Service is federally funded and really tasked with providing Native Americans with culturally appropriate healthcare services at no cost to Native people. Growing up and accessing, the service, I always remember my mom telling me, we have this date for such and such appointment. We cannot miss it because we won't get in for another year, and always wondering, why is it, that we don't have this access to healthcare in a way where it is a fiduciary duty based on treaties of the United States government to provide that free healthcare based on the extraction of our land and our resources. I also, grew up really seeing the impact of both historical and intergenerational trauma and the lack of access to the support services we really need as Native Americans to be able to heal through a lot of the pain and trauma of colonization. And seeing substance misuse, seeing the disproportionate impact of mental health adversity on not only my family, but my community. So that really, set the tone for me and this kind of interest in healthcare and specifically mental health. And I grew up dancing in the powwow circle. So if you know anything about powwow, it's really a social gathering that we come together as a Native community to really celebrate our cultural heritage, and in that circle, we understand this medicine wheel, and that is the interconnectedness of all things, right? The mind, the body, the spirit. And so really, my foundation in the way I look at mental health and I look at health is this holistic approach. And it's so great in the 21st century now, the Western world is starting to really harness this, respect Indigenous knowledge, which I really see as a revitalization of Indigenous knowledge. But I would say that really is my foundation of healthcare, my personal experience growing up and the way in which Indigenous worldview really shapes the way in which we care for ourselves and we care for community.
Well, thank you for that, Sutton. And, I totally agree with a holistic approach. And this is an issue that is personal and personal to all of us. Justin or Sophie, would you like to share?
You want to go first, Sophie? Or?
Sure, I can jump in.
Okay.
So for me, a lot of my background in minority mental health comes from growing up with an intersectional background. So being both Jewish and Latina, a lot of times people try to group me into one of those boxes and expect my experience to fit in. It doesn't. And I think in minority mental health care, you're seeing a big movement towards cultural competence, which I am so glad to see so many young people advocating for that. But a lot of times people that sit at intersections are kind of left behind because Ultimately what that does is kind of try to group us into boxes that weren't built with intersectionality and with that humanity in mind. And a big part of that was recognizing my place and not being able to speak to a lot of the experience of what it's like to be a minority in mental health care. A lot of my non-white passing Latino brothers and sisters do not have the same experience that I did with the privilege that I experienced in the mental health care system. And being able to say, I cannot speak to that experience, but being asked to do that sometimes is kind of a pretty frustrating experience that a lot of youth mental health advocates experience. So that's why I think Minority Mental Health Month is so important, and being able to uplift the voices of people that experience mental health from an intersectional background is just so important.
Thanks, Sophie. And I think intersectionality is key. So many of us sit in many spaces and occupy many boxes. And in this country, it's very easy for folks to want to pinpoint you and put you into one. So I do want to turn it over to Justin, and I just ask folks when you're not speaking to mute, because I think with 4 folks on, sometimes we get a little bit of feedback.
Figure out where the mute button. Okay, I see the mute button. All right. So yeah, first of all, just thank you so much again for having me. And I really appreciated what Seth mentioned, because I think that the indigenous and BIPOC gets forgotten a lot. It's like the redheaded stepchild of the word BIPOC. We talk a lot about Black people. We talk a lot about persons of color, which encompasses pretty much, if you're not white, then you're a person of color. But we don't really talk about the I. So I really appreciated that share. So just to your question, ethnic background, when you grow up as a minority group, there's a lot of cultural things that happen based in stigmas that happen that are ingrained in you as a generational thing, right? Many of us never saw our parents take care of their mental health because they weren't taught how to take care of their mental health. I remember an early story I shared on the podcast of a guy, he's about 40 years old now. He told me he was young and he was crying. He told his parents he was sad. And his parents said, there's no such thing as being sad. You can't be sad. Go outside and play. Like, he was literally like just bawling and couldn't figure out what he was going through. And that would cause parents to react in that type of way. So that's really a struggle, because then if you grow up with that mindset, as kids, we're likely to imitate our parents. We like to grow up to talk like them, to do things like them. So just like we can get good habits from them, we can also get bad habits from them as well too. And I think that's a huge problem in all of our communities, is not seeing the right behaviors modeled. So then a lot of us grow up with this lackluster approach to mental health, and then you couple that with there being need for more resources and policy and access for minorities, groups, and people of color. It really creates a huge mental health struggle that we've seen, especially highlighted in the last 3 years since the pandemic. And so I just can't wait for us to dive deep into this conversation today, because it's certainly needed.
Well, I love what you just lifted up right there, Justin. And it's important because these are discussions that oftentimes may not happen in families. And, you know, for myself, I feel like this is a conversation and something that I'm now having more often in adulthood. And it's something that maybe I have started within my family. And so it kind of doesn't matter where you start, and if you were exposed to talking about these things before, or if you're the first to do it. I think it's critically important. And I want to touch on the issue of trauma and talk to you and hear a little bit from you, Justin. One, I am an African American, but I also think that there's sometimes gender dynamics when we're talking about mental health, and that when we talk about different communities, trauma, especially in minority communities, is something that we've been experiencing, and quite frankly is in our DNA. From the beginning of the founding of this country that was already in place before, right? And so, and just really all the kind of layers of that: racism, discrimination, colonization, othering. But I think particularly for Black men, there sometimes aren't enough conversations talking about trauma that they're experiencing in their communities, that they're experiencing in their families, and how we can empower them. I know you've talked a lot about this and would love to hear your thoughts and share that with the broader group.
Yeah, so first, one of the struggles, obviously, as a community of Black people, goes back to, like you mentioned, slavery. And then even once we were freed in the 1800s, you had the Emancipation Proclamation. We know, obviously, Juneteenth was just made a holiday because a lot of Black people still didn't know they were free until later on. And then even once there was a semblance of freedom, there was still a bunch of racism, right? The civil rights movement, people forget, MLK and Rosa Parks, that was like the 60s, you know what I mean? Like, we had a long way to go of still dealing with this systematic racism. And even since then, we still deal with things. And then particularly the Black men, one of the biggest struggles, I believe, is this pressure to provide, this pressure to perform. A lot of men's worth is tied to what can I do? What can I provide? What's my job? What's my salary? What can I do for my family, right? And when we put all this pressure on men to provide for their families, for their wife, for their kids, to show up as a man, if those things are removed, a lot of men don't know who they are. They don't know who they are as people without the title, without the money. You see these football players make millions of dollars, they retire and they lose it because they don't have anything to attach to anymore. And I think one of the most important things we can do for men of color is to remind them that there is value in just you existing. There's value in just you showing up and being your authentic self, because society wants to place your only value, your only worth on what you can provide. And then you get to a point where you feel like you no longer have anything to give. And then now we see the suicide rate, which is about 3-to-1 of men of color completing suicide to women. So because of this ingrained pressure, because of all the things that come with it, we see a lot of men give up on life. And I think the way that we can combat that is by obviously getting resources, and we'll talk about that in a second, and we'll highlight a few of those resources, but mostly first just reminding them that they're not alone and that there's value in this, just them showing up and existing and being here. There is value in that, and them just existing.
Wow, that was so powerful. And I saw you getting a lot of love in the chat. There was one comment about the importance of promoting. We have to start promoting therapy and let it be known that it's okay to not be okay as men. That was one of the comments that we saw there. And thank you for being really clear and focused and talking about suicide, right? Because when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about stress and trauma, mental illness, and all the challenges. There are a lot of things that are happening, but we also know, I think, the worst case scenario is that we lose someone from this earth, and that we're not able to reach someone or prevent that from happening. And I'll say, you brought up the statistics when it comes to men, and then Black men especially. One of the things I found really disturbing, especially as we were in the height of the pandemic, is the stats that we were seeing as it relates to young people. I mean, they were just going through the roof. I think there are a lot of things that we could attribute to it. Folks, having to do remote learning, being disconnected from community and friends and others. But I think it's, when we see things happening with our young people, it really is like a canary in the coal mine, that there are issues that we have not been addressing as communities of color, as a country more generally. And we really have to ring the alarm. Sutton, I know you have done a lot of work with a number of organizations and really trying to advise them how to reach young people and address the issue of mental health. I'd love to hear from you about a little bit of that work, but I'd also want you to touch on technology, because I think it's something, and I will. So sorry, Sophie, I wanted you to talk about young people, but Sutton, I'm going to go to you because I know you have a special project that's really awesome in the technological space, because we have amazing tools that we didn't have access to years ago, and I want to talk about that. So Sophie, can you share a little bit about your work with advising on young people in the mental health space?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And thank you so much for bringing up technology and that intersection with its impact on young people. I think a lot of us today are really struggling with our mental health because of social media. And connectivity is so important for mental health. Connectivity really does foster mental wellness. And part of being a young person with so much technology at our fingertips is the ability to build solidarity with other young people and collectively organize and find community. And that's absolutely beautiful. But what's misunderstood about young people online so much of the time is that it's not our fault that this is negatively impacting our mental health, because these technology platforms themselves are built to addict and harm the mental health of young people. We have had the CEO of tech platforms themselves say, we do distribute harmful content because it makes young people more likely to spend more hours online. A young woman will receive a TikTok video that blatantly promotes eating disorders every 39 seconds. And that statistic is absolutely heartbreaking because it doesn't matter what you're scrolling through, you will end up seeing that video eventually, and it can and will negatively impact young people's mental health. So that is the message that I really try to bring across whenever I'm organizing to advise an organization on young people, is that this isn't our fault. And I think so much of our social media usage is really misunderstood by older generations. You know, young people are addicting themselves, they're trading their in-person friends for online friends. These addictions are not our fault. They are something that has been institutionally built in order to drive profit. So yeah, that's kind of the point I want to touch on with the technology. I'm really, really excited to hear what everyone has to say about that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for lifting up that. Some of that information I wasn't even aware of, Sophie, and so this is why these conversations are so important. Sutton, is there any more that you want to layer on to the technology piece? I know Sophie talked about in some ways how social media is detrimental to us, but want to broaden that and talk about maybe some of the benefits that technology does provide with access and resources for mental health.
Yeah, and there's just a point I'd like to touch on that Justin brought up that I thought was so important, really talking about the financial pressures that men feel, you know, and how that impacts mental health. And I think, you know, if you've ever taken a clinical course in your bachelor's, we've learned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I think it's really important to look at that structure and understand that that was actually appropriated from the Blackfoot tribe, where you have with the Maslow's hierarchy is looking at, you know, physiological needs, basic needs, again, looking at finances as like this place to reach self-actualization. When in the Blackfoot's version of this, self-actualization is at the bottom, and it's actually community actualization, and it's actually cultural perpetuity that's at the top. And it's not without community, right, that kinship and that care of community, that you can really be able to reach this new level of consciousness and actualization for yourself. So again, really thinking about the way in which indigenous worldviews are centered versus the Western worldviews, where it's this very individualistic, reductionist frame of view, whereas in indigenous communities, it's about community in itself. It's about that kinship, right? It's about community, and that is how we can reach that next level of consciousness. So just wanted to touch that because I see those physiological and basic needs, being at the core of a lot of the issues. But when you think about technology and Shock Talk, which is a application that we've been working on, and you know, I'm a storyteller, so I've got to tell the story on how that's come, you know, together. We launched Urban Indigenous Collective in 2019, really with this mission to provide access to culturally tailored health and wellness services for urban natives. We launched on Indigenous Peoples Day on Randall's Island with a community-based needs assessment. We had a pop-up tent and a table. Shout out to my mom, I see she's here in the live, and those were really donations from her. You know, we had the smallest budget, but we had something that is priceless, which was that community-based needs assessment, which really directly asked our community about their health and wellness, right? And we had these iPads and we had the paper versions, but we thought, oh, no one's gonna use the paper versions. But what we saw is a lot of people actually utilize the paper versions because they wanted to sit down in community. It was the first time an organization was directly asking them, around their needs. And that has become really central to everything we do with Urban Indigenous Collective, really being in protocol, which is consultation, right? Really wanting to create a community-based organization that is completely based on the consultation of our urban natives' needs. And so, you know, what we found is, you know, of course, what we know to be true, but we never want to use our own assumptions when we're creating something, is a lack of culturally tailored health and wellness services for urban natives here. We understand that 71% of natives now live in urban areas, but when we look at Indian Health Service, we recognize that only 2% of their budget actually goes to urban areas. So we are very limited in capacity when it comes to urban Indian health programs, where most of them are outreach and referral. You do not see one full ambulatory care clinic that is open to all Indigenous peoples along the Eastern Seaboard. And I find that ironic because we look at where that first impact of settler colonization was, and who is the last to receive the economic investments needed to really be able to heal from that exploitation, right, and extraction. So, you know, looking at that community-based needs assessment, we understood the need to create this community center, get Indigenous therapists on the ground, and really create a full ambulatory care clinic. And then COVID happened, right? So like I said, 2019 is when we launched, and it was, you know, this moment of resilience, I will say, for us as the Urban Indigenous Collective, where we thought, what can we do right now? And it was this understanding of social media and the impact that's having on our urban Native people and Native and Indigenous peoples, you know, throughout the diaspora. And so what we decided to do was create Shock Talk, which really leverages different omni channels as points of intervention to really support Indigenous peoples with a direct connection to Indigenous therapists, really using AI to really connect those users to our database of Indigenous therapists based on a culturally appropriate match, and a really very unique, I would say, survey that really makes sure that that is a appropriate, sustainable patient-provider connection that's being happening. And so we're really excited right now where we're fundraising to be able to create the application, but this does live on Facebook Messenger right now. But it's something that we know our Indigenous communities are using. Everyone's on Facebook. Our tribes throughout the United States have their own Facebook pages. That's how they're updating their tribal members, because again, we don't all live on reservation. So we're really looking at how we can utilize innovative technology through social media, omni-channels, and AI to really support the needs of Indigenous peoples, regardless of colonial borders and regardless of blood quantum criteria.
Sutton, I love that, and I love, you know, all your thoughts around innovation and really bringing resources like this to the community. It's so important. And Justin, look, I know you have been diving into the technology space with your podcast. What kind of drove you to start that, and kind of what are your thoughts around technology, or really grassroots work? Like, how can we help ourselves even when there are policies out there that are really not doing the job that's needed to reach our communities?
Yeah. And so, and before I get into that, I'll just really quickly, just to touch on what the two ladies brought out, which was just amazing stuff. The pandemic was talked about, and we have to remember the pandemic's effect on young people and that isolation that came from it. Education systems, some people fell behind. It's interesting, in late 2021, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who's the United States Surgeon General, he declared a youth mental health crisis. He wrote a beautiful article about the statistics and all the alarms that I think, Sophie, you mentioned earlier about social media. Earlier this year, he wrote another piece about the harmful effects of social media for our young people. So there are issues going on. I want to give a special shout out to my friend, Dr. Alfie, who is the founder of the Acoma Project up in Northern Virginia, which is doing amazing work for children, for youth mental health, particularly youth of color. She has a gala this Friday, a sneaker gala to fundraise and to bring awareness. She's doing some amazing work. But we need more programs and resources for our young people, because they are the next generation. We talked earlier about this generational trauma thing, right? Generation to generation handing it down. Well, they are they're next up. So we give them what they need to be adequately able to take care of themselves and set themselves up for success. Then we're doing so much for the stigma of mental health. I just had to mention that because they are really, really struggling with some things going on. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is focusing on that. But to your point about the podcast, for me, as a teen, I never had an avenue. I never had a way to create, to talk about who I was or what I was going through. I had the fight with my parents just to convince them to let me go to therapy. They finally did. I was diagnosed with ADHD and clinical depression. I was medicated, but that was a fight. And even then in the Black community, it's kind of like, oh, he's got to go see his crazy doctor again, right? And so when I got in my mid-20s, I figured I wanted to create my own way of expressing myself. Musicians, songwriters, they do it through music. Actors, actresses, they do it through their art. You know, artists, they do it through their drawings. For me, as a speaker, it was through a podcast. It was kind of like my audio form of my diary, right? Here's who I am. Here's what I'm going through. I'm going to tell stories about what I'm experiencing. I'm going to be completely vulnerable. And whether someone listens or not, this is, for me, is going to be a healing thing for me to move forward in my journey. Thankfully, people did listen. They did support it. They did relate to some of the things that I was going through, and they appreciated that level of vulnerability. And I felt that that was the best way that I could get my message out there and make a change, by being the change, right? By showing, hey, here's a Black man in his 20s going through things. I go through things like him. I can relate to him. So then along the way, we grew the audience. We started bringing in other guests, people that could also tell their stories and relate, whether it was, you know, interview some celebrities, some public figures, clinicians, and get all different sides of mental health into the podcast so that it can be educational, it can be resourceful, it can help us build more relationships and connections in the mental health space. So it's been cathartic for me. It's a blessing to have an audience. I never take that for granted. And I think moving forward, I'd love to see more creators use their platform. And we're seeing a lot of it since the pandemic, but I would love to even see more of it. We're seeing more rappers and singers talk about mental health in their music. We're seeing more shows include mental health pieces and sitcoms. Like, we need more of these visuals for our young people in our society to see, because that's what normalizes it. Because 40 years ago, it wasn't normal. Now, as we continue to talk about it, we continue to put it in our media, we continue to podcast about it, we continue to have sessions like this, then we destigmatize mental health as a whole. So I think that's an amazing way that we're using technology, we're using our resources to get this message out there. It's more than just mental health awareness. Awareness is a great buzzword, and we need to get there because there's a lot of people who aren't aware that there's an issue, right? So let's get them to awareness. But if we just stay with awareness, we're not doing anything. I like mental health action, actionable items that can actually make a change, make a difference in our communities. And this session that we're having is an example of that.
I love that. Mental health action. I got to drop that. Or you know what, Justin, drop that in the comments. Some folks were in here and they were asking how much money you need to raise. They were asking how to connect with you. Can you also drop some of that information in the comments? But Justin, I love where you're taking us. And so I'm going to stay on that. You were talking about the importance of art and artistry and self-expression. So Sophie, you know, I have to look to you because you're my poet on this call, and I know you were able to share a poem for Mayor Karen Bass, you know, which was huge and instrumental in having an African American woman lead the city of Los Angeles. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about your advocacy and your work, but your artistry as well.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is, like, everybody here is an artist. Advocacy is inherently art. Our existence as resistance is an art form. A lot of times we're kind of pressured to know every single detail about mental health policy, about the numbers. But that's part of a system that's just meant to drive people into numbers. And the only way that we can really break that and break the existence of the box is creating our own way of healing. And that is definitely true for me. I'm someone with lived experience in the mental health care system and institutional marginalization because of the mental health care system. And for me, art was so healing. It was my way of finding humanity in such a dehumanizing system. And the root of that was being able to email back and forth with my creative writing and English teacher at the time. A little bit of a backstory. she left my high school around the same time that I did to pursue mental health treatment because of her metastasized breast cancer. And both of us were in a very, very dark place at the time. And we'd send each other poems describing our hospital walls, kind of back and forth. We became pen pals. And through that, we were really able to break down those walls and reconnect with ourselves and reconnect with what it means to be alive and to be human. And the meaning of that is to create things and to put things out there and to self-express. So I think that all advocacy is art. My advocacy is definitely rooted in art. And both of what Sutton and Justin mentioned, that is art. I mean, it's incredible being able to see how much that can connect people. And yeah, in terms of kind of where that's taken me in my advocacy, it did start off as like very real and raw poems that I kind of put out there into the world about the experience of being a young person in the mental health care system and about the experience of coming from an intersectional background and how that influenced me. And that opened up so many doors and it opened up so many connections. And I'm forever grateful to the youth poetry scene and all the youth artists out there for creating a safe space for me and creating that community when I felt so alone.
Well, I think the key words there, Sophie, was connection and community. And thank you so much for sharing your story about how you and your teacher really supported yourself through this challenge. I would be remiss if I didn't really give you all some space to share some words of advice or guidance for those that may be struggling right now, who might feel isolated or even unsure about how to seek help, what they should do. So Sutton, if you could share, and then we can go to Justin and Sophie. But I really want this to be instructive and meaningful, but also to create a space where support and resources can be shared for folks that might be on and might be experiencing some challenges right now. That's how we move from awareness, as you said, Justin, right, into action.
Absolutely. I think I talked about community being the foundation of self-actualization. And right here, right now, we are planting seeds of being in community with each other and sharing, the work that we do, recognizing that we are those who are ready to help, to be in community, to support folks on that journey. And so I would say to remember that you're not alone. We have not only community around us in which we can reach out to lean in on, but we also have our ancestors. We have, when we talk about trauma, when we talk about historical and intergenerational trauma, we get away from the resilience of the ancestry that lives within our DNA, right? And so really being able to reconnect to that ancestry, to do the research, do the learning on the traditions, right? On the ways of being and knowing that you practiced before settler colonization, to draw upon those ways is so important. So I would say, again, the connection with community, but your connection with ancestry, because I always say, what is a tree without its roots? Really get to know who you are, get to know where your people come from, and get to know their practices, ways of being. There's so much richness and spiritual, I think, consciousness that lives within that journey in itself, to connection to source and whatever that means for you.
Talking about planting seeds, you're dropping gems today, Sutton. That was beautiful. Justin?
Yeah, I want to echo the same thing. You're not alone. Find someone that you can trust. And this piece is not even just for the person going through something. This is for someone who can support someone going through something. Normalize just being there for someone, showing up for them, listening, showing kindness and love. Not always someone needs advice or needs you to fix things. Some of us have fixer mindsets. That's something I've always struggled with. Like, well, let me fix your problem. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They just want to be supported. They just want to be listened to and know that they're not, even if nothing about their circumstances change, the fact that someone was there for them. Because a lot of times people who have attempted suicide, they'll say they just felt alone. They felt like there was no one that could be there for them. So don't ever let someone feel that feeling. It's a horrible feeling to feel. Show up for people, give them that space. And for someone going through something, understand that how you make it through what you're going through right now, how you battle through all your obstacles, for one day, when you share your story, when you share your perseverance is going to be the blueprint for someone else. It's going to be a way that someone else is going to be able to overcome. It's going to be a survival guide, as it were, because now you're a living example of perseverance, of what it looks like to get through that situation, to get the resources, to surround yourself with love and support. And I want to name off a few organizations because, as I mentioned, Black men are important to me. So there's a few organizations that cater specifically to Black men or communities of color. Silence the Shame, Shanti Das, the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, founded by Taraji P. Henson, ran by Tracy Jade and April Henson, her sister. They're doing amazing work for the community of color. Therapyforblackmen.org. InnoPsych, which is founded by my friend Dr. Charmaine Jackman. This is a directory. A lot of times it's hard enough to get people of color in the therapy seat, but this is a directory where you can go and actually put in information and find a therapist of color, a licensed professional of color. No one on there is not of color, because a lot of times, if we're going to get there, we want to see someone that looks like us, that we can relate to in that therapy chair opposite of us as the patient. And so she's made it easier for us to do that with her directory, InnoPsych. And then, of course, I have to mention Black Men Heal. Black Men Heal is an organization that I actually work for. I run their day-to-day social media strategy and content strategy. Amazing organization founded by two women out of Pennsylvania, and we send men to therapy for free. We raise money and we fundraise and send them up to 8 free sessions with a licensed therapist. We're in 8 states plus DC, and we do a free virtual support group every Sunday called King's Corner at 7 p.m. where there's a mental health topic. There's a bunch of men, 50 to 100 men gathered together to support, to talk about things, normalizing other men supporting each other. It's a beautiful space and it's free. And then we go out in the community. We were in Philadelphia a few weeks ago. We did a wellness event where we invited men out for free. We fed them. We gave them massage chairs, yoga, facials. We gave them gift bags, and we talked about mental health. We talked about trauma. We talked about, I think the theme was letters to my father. We talked about that father-son relationship that many of us are lacking when we grow up. And we're going to come to DC later this fall. So that's an organization I'm proud to be a part of, because that's my mission, to do the work in the community. I know there's a lot of other organizations out there, but those are just a few resources that you Black men, you brothers out there, if you're on here or if you're listening and you support a Black man, please send these resources off to them, because there is help. I think there's more we can do. There's more that we can talk about to get more, but there is a lot that exists. I think the struggle is letting them know what exists, getting that information to them so that they know what's already in place for them to get some help, and reminding them, of course, that they're not alone.
Thank you so much for sharing that information, Justin. And I hope we can encourage others who may not have been on here the live. This will live on the National Urban League's YouTube page and on its Instagram page. So if you know of any folks that are looking for resources or just more education on the topic, I encourage any of you that had the benefit of joining us for this conversation to share that information as well. Sophie, I'm going to give you the last word to close us out.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this pretty short, but I love what both of you said. And I think the theme for me that's weaving through the two of those are finding hope and hopelessness. And what I tell young people that are struggling with their mental health, especially young people that have intergenerational trauma in their roots, is that you have unwavering permission to experience hopelessness and to experience hope. A lot of times, those of us that have intergenerational trauma are told we are the greatest hope of our ancestors. You know, we are the hope, we are the future. And sometimes it can feel like that hope does not belong to us, but it does belong to you. And sometimes a lot of us feel guilty for feeling hopeless, knowing that our ancestors and the people before us have experienced what other people would call worse situations. But you're allowed to feel that hopelessness. Unfortunately, the world is a place where that is a feeling that occurs because of so much injustice. But once you give yourself permission to feel that hopelessness and realize that it is valid, you can go out there and seek communities that provide you with hope. And if you cannot hold that hope for yourself, you deserve to have other people that can hold it for you.
Wow, that was so powerful. Hope, and finding folks to hold that hope for us if we're in moments and times where we don't feel it for ourselves. I just want to thank you all so much for your work, for your passion, for your advocacy, for your artistry, really, and for your leadership on a topic and an issue that is so important to all of us. Thank you, Sutton. Thank you, Sophie. And thank you, Justin. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. I hope we can continue to connect with you and share your work and the amazing things you're doing with our National Urban League movement. And to all of those who tuned in today, thank you for being part of the conversation. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your question. I'm already going to thank you in advance for your support of these efforts. I know dollars are dropping for Sutton right now in this work. But, you know, really this is an equity issue. It's a justice issue. And, you know, I just want to remind you all to join us for our next show. But remember, the time for justice is always now. And so as Justin said, we are changing this. Look, it's no longer National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month in July. I'm deeming it as the show, it's Minority Mental Health Action, right? So let's put the emphasis on action. Thanks you all for everything. Have an amazing evening. And thanks for bringing so much love and light to this show today. Take care.
Thank you.